All right. If you were with us last week, just a little recap. Isaac, the son of promise, Sarah and Abraham's son, was finally born. And here we are, and we're still in Genesis 21. We might be in Genesis a few weeks. And we're going to look at verse 8. And it's always like, man, it just feels like that was the end of that story. We just wish we could just stop there and be like, Isaac was born. The promise was fulfilled. And now, that feels good. Let's feel good. But unfortunately, this is real life. And the Bible keeps to real life and tells us all the good and all the bad. And here we see a little problem they have. So let's read in verse 8. The child grew, Isaac, and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son, Isaac." Man, Isaac was just born, right? Everything was good, but here we see it didn't last for long. And honestly, it lasts about 3 years between 1 through 7, and now here we are in 8, and it feels like, they just went right into it. So it feels like it's the next day, but actually 3 years have passed. Isaac's around 3 years old, and so he's just been weaned at 3, which is the proper age for weaning. But they did wean a little later in those days because that's like free food. When you're worried about feeding all these people and this child can eat for free up till 3, you wean them. Sometimes 4 or 5, go with what you can. So they had this great feast to celebrate Isaac being weaned. But at this feast, Sarah sees Ishmael, and shouldn't even call him by name, mocking Isaac. And I don't know what your version says as you follow along. I might say laughing, scoffing, or mocking. But the word actually is sakak. Salkak, you can throw that word up there. I didn't tell you it was there, but it is. So it's got that sound, salkak. And it means to laugh. So when they laugh, they would say, salkak. And they'd be like, man, laughter. But it means to laugh outright in merriment or scorn. And by implication, it means to sport, to mock, to make sport of, to toy with. So it's the ancient word for bullying. Right? And that's Sarah's just anti-bullying right now. She's made posters. She's thrown them up around the tents. But in some versions and even commentaries, it might imply, because I read some and they're like, man, this is just good fun. This is just good fun. And this is a mother overreacting. But the original word, sakak, I believe it implies something more, because that word implies mockery, to make sport of. And sometimes, on the outside of things, and I've had this happen in my life, and you guys probably have too. We see something done, we see something said between people, and we might think it's a joke, or everyone thinks it's a joke, and they think it's in good fun. But for some of us who have a little bit of knowledge of the situation, when we see it, we know the malice behind it. Has that ever happened where someone's like, oh, it wasn't a big deal, they said this, but you're like, but what I know of the situation, I know that there was malice in it that you couldn't see because you're not aware of the situation. And I think Sarah is aware of the malice behind it. This is probably not the first time. They all live together. She might not have seen, but someone might have said, when you live close with people, someone comes, hey, listen, I don't want to cause a problem. Just want to tell you, I saw Ishmael and Isaac the other day, and some of the things Ishmael was doing with Isaac, I didn't really like it. I don't know if you've ever been in this situation when your kid's at school, maybe, and you're like, well, I don't really know. I don't know what the situation was. Maybe it wasn't bad as it seems. We kind of go with this for a while, and then finally you see it for yourself. You see it happening in front of your eyes. And then not only is it that situation, it's everything you've ever heard. You're like, oh, it's true. When they said this and said this and said that, and I was kind of like, I don't know. When you see it for yourself, it verifies everything. And it verifies the malice behind everything. And so I think this is where Sarah is at. Okay, Ishmael, at this time, he's 16 years old. All right, so it's one thing, we might picture this not knowing the situation, and you're picturing, oh, Ishmael's 5, he's 7, this baby's 3. Kids mess with each other. It happens all the time. But when you see a 16-year-old mocking or making sport of a 3-year-old, there's something there. There's something there. You can see, like, being a youth pastor, I could always see how the kids interacted with my children. And you can see people's hearts, and you can kind of see how they are. And, some are like really loving, and some are like, I don't know what to do with you, But rarely do you see one that's just like, hey, like, because when you see like a 6-year-old messing with a 3-year-old, I think everyone's kind of like, like, this is weird. I'm uncomfortable. And this is the situation. Like, and I think a 16-year-old making sport of or mocking the cause of the feast. The cause of the feast. They were celebrating this kid, and there's a 16-year-old mocking the kid. And it kind of reveals a little bit of bitterness. A little bit of hatred maybe that's been planted. And even though I don't think Sarah's like, listen, I love Ishmael, but hate spreads, bitterness spreads. And what I really want to do is I just want to keep it from spreading, right? We got to just cut the sin off. I want him to stay, love the kid dearly, but we don't want it to spread. She's not thinking about that. She's like, get this kid out of here. But as we know, bitterness can spread. Bitterness can spread. Hatred can spread. If you've ever worked with anyone or been with anyone and there was some bitterness or hatred, that there was always like a little bit of talking behind and kind of spreading that seed, sowing that seed, getting that bitterness to go. And Hagar knows that Ishmael, like, this is a situation. She knows, like, the moment Isaac is born, he might take some of the inheritance. This is where our future was set. Now things are a little bit different. And that each mother is looking to be like, were they slighted? Was my child slighted? Oh, was my child slighted? We're always looking for slight. So, like, this is a big deal, okay? It's not just a sibling rivalry. I mean, like in ancient days and in North Korea, when someone comes into power, they would kill all the other brothers and sisters, right? Just so that no one could use that seed of bitterness, sow that seed, and use them to take over, right? And so that's what Sarah's worried about. She's worried about assassinations. No, I'm just kidding. But as for sending Hagar away, right? She wants to send Hagar away. And as for sending her away, Hagar belongs to Sarah. It's Sarah's legal right at this time to send Hagar away. But Abraham, she cannot send Ishmael away. She can send legally, she can send the mother away, but she cannot send Ishmael away because Ishmael is Abraham's son. Remember last time, because this has happened before, where Sarah was like, send that woman away before she had Ishmael. And she just said, I'm sending her away. She's telling Abraham. She didn't need to ask his permission. She's just like, I'm doing it. But here, she has to say, you need to send them away because she can send Hagar away, but she cannot send Ishmael away. Abraham has to do it. This is entirely up to Abraham. And it's also, this inheritance is up to Abraham because he was born to a slave woman or a concubine, and Abraham can decide to accept or deny Ishmael as an heir. He can choose whether to give him the full rights as an heir or to take it away. So this is all up to Abraham. And it seems obvious up to this time that Abraham has accepted Ishmael as his heir. He has already accepted Ishmael as his heir. Everyone pretty much assumed Ishmael was the heir until Isaac was born, and they might have had some question or some trepidation of what's going to happen, but it was never like Abraham denied Ishmael. He had accepted him as the heir apparent. It was his right, which means Ishmael and not Isaac, if Abraham had could receive the firstborn share. And we know that Abraham, we don't really know his heart or his mind, but I think he intended to split it. Because she said, he's not going to share in the inheritance of my son. And I think Abraham intended to split it. And that might seem like, oh, that's really nice of Abraham, but he was going to split it even though God had told him before these children were born that Isaac was the heir. God told him that he would provide an heir. And Abraham had done all these things to try to make it happen, right? But God had told him the whole time, Isaac is the heir. I'm going to provide this son, and Isaac is the heir. And sometimes we know when like the minute Isaac's born, he knows this is the child of promise. This is the child God promised. This is the one. This is the heir. And he knows that the minute Isaac's born. But sometimes God says, hey, this is what you need to do. And we're kind of like, let's see how it plays out. Let's just see how it plays out, right? Maybe we can do this without anyone becoming angry. Maybe something will happen along the way. We've got a lot of time. How many times do you know when you say, let's just see how it happens. We've got some time. Before you know it, that time comes to call, and it's far worse than you ever imagined. And you're like, I wish I'd just done something in the beginning. This would have been a lot easier in the beginning, but I waited and I was like, let's just see. Let's just see how it works out. Maybe it'll work out good, right? Has that ever worked out good for anybody? No, let's just try it out. Let's just try it out. So if you're ever with someone, no, I'm just kidding. If you're ever with someone and they're like, let's just see how it works out, be like, that sounds bad. That sounds like a bad idea. Let's do something about it now. Because he knows what God had said. He knows what God had said. I don't know what he thought was going to happen. And it may be important to note, that Muslims believe that Ishmael is the child of promise. And that Muhammad is an heir of Ishmael. So that's kind of the whole thing. But Isaac was, and now it's time for Abraham to decide, because he said, let's just see if it works out. And then he's got to make a decision. And everyone's old enough to have their feelings hurt. So let's look at verse 11. And it said, just like we knew it would, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. It says the matter distressed Abraham greatly. Obviously, how could it not? How could it not? Even the word distressed, I don't think we picture the anxiety. Like if someone is like, I am distressed. It almost feels like a proper way to have anxiety. If you went and they're like, hey, are you suffering from anxiety? And be like, no, I'm a little distressed. I'm like, oh, that sounds very minor. You've got that under control, right? But Ishmael is his son. Ishmael is his son. He loves him. Even though the plan that brought forth Ishmael was a mistake on Abraham and Sarah's part, Ishmael is not a mistake to Abraham. He's his son. He's his son. Surely growing up, Ishmael did things that reminded Abraham of himself. It's just inevitable, right? He came from him. He's going to do things that remind Abraham of him. Like when we take pictures of Flynn or things happen with Flynn, and like people will be we'll have a picture and the girls are like, and Flynn's like, and you're just like, ugh. You've ruined the picture again with your thumbs up, bro. But if you look at pictures of me as a kid, I'm all like, and I didn't teach him that. I wasn't like, hey, let me show you how to pose for pictures, okay? Someone pulls out a camera, double thumbs up. You want to look like you're the coolest kid in the world. But it's just like natural, and it's cute, and it's adorable, and it's just like, man, he's doing things just like I did. Whenever he excels at something, I was like, he's just like me. Just like me. Whenever he's bad at something or disobeys, I'm like, Daisy, what have you done? I was a very good child. I'm just kidding. She was probably better than I was. So if he ever, it'll all be my fault. But he does poses and he smirks just like me. And he wants to spend every minute of the day with me. When I get home, he is all about me. The minute I walk in the door, I can have a bunch of bags. He's like, hey, let's look at our fantasy team. We might need to switch out our fantasy team. I don't know if you know this, but Jonathan Smith is questionable, so we need to do something with him, okay? Then let's go outside and throw the football. Then I might get tired of that. Let's play soccer. Then we're going to come in. We're going to have a snack together. Then you and I are going to go to the bathroom, because I'll have to go to the bathroom, and you will obviously come with me. And then, you know what I mean? And it's just like me and him. He's got it planned out. Sometimes he has written out a list of what we'll do. And I'm like, buddy, this cannot be accomplished in a day. This cannot be accomplished in a day. I don't know how easy or cheap it is, you think, to build a Lord of the Rings hotel, but that is not happening, and it might be a little frightful. I don't know how you can sell that. But seriously, but the fact that he likes Lord of the Rings is all just like, we had Lego Lord of the Rings video game, and we play it, and he puts pillows up between us because there's some scenes that are emotional, and he'll be not want me to see when King Theoden dies, and I'm just like, buddy, every tear you cry for the death of King Theoden makes me cry because you get it. You just get it. Oh, you get it. One time he was like, this music is so beautiful, it makes me want to cry. I'm just like, oh, it is, isn't it? Isn't it? Oh my gosh, it takes place right in the scene where Frodo is talking to Gandalf, and then nerding out. And but I love it. Everything we share like that, I just love it. I'm just like, man, you can't even imagine having the same interests with this little person. And I'm saying all that because when Ishmael has to go, this is a big decision. This is rough. I mean, we look at these papers sometime, we read this Bible, and I don't think we connect, or sometimes we're speed reading, not trying to get anything out of it, but I don't know if we really understand, man, the difficulty to send him away. To send him away. When Ishmael leaves, a part of Abraham's heart goes with him forever. It's not just cut and dry. It's not just Isaac's the son of promise. I finally got what I wanted. Now I can let Ishmael go. It's not that easy. And now Ishmael isn't a child. He's 16 years old. Some think 17, which in this day and age, it's customary for a young man to go set up their own lives. So it's almost it's time to kind of let him go anyway. But that doesn't make it any easier. And God tells him it will be okay. He says, I will make Ishmael into a nation. I will take care of him. It doesn't say, notice with Isaac, there's a promise to be a nation and a promise to be fruitful and a promise of the land. I've given you this land. There's no promise of a land with Ishmael. There's a promise he will build a nation, which means many people. Abraham's blessing onto Isaac is to be a nation and to inherit this land. But God only promises that he will make Ishmael into a nation. And God says he will do this. You know why he says he'll do it? Because he's Abraham's son. He said, I will do this for you. I will do this because I love you. But even though he'll be a nation, it's important to note, as Paul does in Hebrews 11:17, that not all of Abraham's biological children are children of the promise. Not all of Abraham's biological children are children of the promise. Paul talks about this later when the Jews are like, hey, we're heirs of Abraham. We're good. And Paul's like, that's not what it's about. That's not what we're talking about here. You're not, just because you were born an heir of Abraham doesn't mean you're a child of the promise. You need to know God and love God. That is what God wants. And we see throughout the Bible, God is constantly cutting and dividing and selecting and setting apart, right? And this is no different. He set apart and chosen Isaac, who was not the firstborn. He was the firstborn of Sarah and Abraham, who he had made the promise to. God did. But he's not the firstborn. He's not the typical one chosen in the world as the inheritor. And so let's go on and see what happens after this in verse 14. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. Man, this is rough. It's so hard when you read this because sometimes you get the perspective of Sarah and you feel so bad for her and you feel like she's been wronged. And then you read the story of Hagar and you feel so bad for her and you feel like she's been wronged. And it's just this is humanity. This is humanity. And God helps both of them because God is so good. But it starts off, God tells him it's okay to send him away. And it says, early the next morning, Abraham took some food and water and gave them to Hagar and the boy and sent them off. Now, early the next morning, it signifies obedience. Abraham's like, okay, I'm going to do what you said. I'm going to send them off. But also, I think it probably tells us that Abraham had a long, long night. I don't think Abraham slept very well or slept at all. He's probably, I don't know if he was just waiting for the sun to rise to get it done, to have it done with, or when the sun started creeping up and being like, it's getting closer, the sun's coming up, people are waking up. He was troubled all night. I wonder if when he sent them off, if Abraham stood there and watched them leave, or if he just couldn't bear it and went back in his tent. I wonder what I would do. I'm would I sit there and watch till they were gone, out of sight completely? Or would I just be like, here's your stuff, and I can't watch? Because even though God said he would take care of them, how many of us know when God says, I'll take care of it? And it's someone we love, we're like, oh, that's cool. You take care of it. And I'm going to take care of it too. And it's just hard for us to like let go. It says they went on their way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. And the Hebrew word here used for wandered, implies uncertainty, loss of direction, hopelessness. It wasn't like, oh, I've got a plan. I've got this place and we're going and I'm lost. It's just kind of like, I don't even know what to do. I didn't see this coming. Where do they go? Where do they go? A woman and her 16-year-old son all alone. What do they do? How do they survive? This is like an unforgiving land. They don't know anyone nearby. It's not like, let's go over to the neighbor's house and just see what they're doing. Is there a wagon train headed out west? Let's jump on it. You know what I mean? Like they're all alone and then they run out of water. Sometimes when we're in situations like this, like those desperate situations, what do? You take an inventory. You're like, well, let's see what we got. When you're in a situation, maybe you lose your job and it's just like, man, we've got this mortgage. What do we do? Like, I don't know if anyone's been in that situation recently, but, and you're like, I don't know what to do. And what do you look at? You look at your inventory, right? You're like, let's see what we got. What can we sell? What can we do? What are our options? And we've always had like options that we can come up with. Well, I could do this. Well, maybe I could do this. Maybe we could do this. What do we have? What do we have to work with? They've got nothing to work with. And maybe Hagar's planning on going back to Egypt. That's where she's from. She's like, maybe we can make it to Egypt. If we can just make it to Egypt, right? And that's like the beginning of it. If we can just get to Egypt, I don't know what we're going to do there, but if we can just get to civilization, where I'm from, where I know some people, maybe something can happen. But they've got to get there. And the most important piece they need to survive to even get there is water. And now they have no water. They have no provisions. Like, it's hopeless. All is lost. Man, and it was just so close. So close, right? Ishmael was like becoming a man, like everything, man, you got to look at this from like Hagar's perspective, where she came from, and then where she was about to be, like right on the precipice, and then all is lost. Like, and sometimes it's like hopeless too when you're in that situation, when you lose everything. You're not just like, because everyone's like, hey, just pick up the pieces and get going, be positive. And you're like, shut up. I just want to be negative for a minute. I could just see her walking and first just being like, what am I going to do? Man, all the things I had, like analyzing what I had, what I've lost. Oh, so close. And here they are, and they don't even have water. And so she put the boy under some bushes and went a bow shot distance away, which is interesting because Ishmael becomes a bowman. And she goes a bow shot distance away so she couldn't watch her son. Couldn't watch her son die. All she had in this world, she could not bear to watch him die. The Hebrew word used for the phrase, she put the boy, when it's used with a human being as the object, it almost always refers to lowering a dead body into a grave or putting someone in their final resting place. So when it says she put the boy in some bushes, it's saying she put him in his grave. She put him in his final resting place. She most likely put him under a bush because it was thorny and would protect his body from predators coming to get him when he was weak, and then also protect him from scavengers coming to pick at his body after he was dead, because she just couldn't bear. She's like, I can't save his life. I can't do anything, but I cannot picture him being eaten or being used as food. So she puts him in these bushes, these thorny bushes, and you have to know it's not just like, ugh. You know that she was down there. She's probably got cuts all over her arm, slipping him in further than she could possibly get him into the safest place. She probably brushed his hair out of his eyes, wiped his face, looked at him. It wasn't just like letting him go. She looked at him. And in looking at him, she was like, I can't stay here. She's just barely keeping it together. She's just barely keeping it together. It tells us. She doesn't cry till she's far away. She's just keeping it together. She couldn't bear to think of what was going to happen. And then she goes a distance away, far enough to not have to watch, but close enough that if he cried out, she could hear him. because she's still his mom. Right? She's like, I can't bear to watch, but I'm going to be close enough that if he calls me, or if he cries out, I can get back to him because I'm not going to abandon him. I just can't watch. And then when she's finally out of the sight of her son, where he can't see, then she loses it. And then it says she begins to sob. Sob. And I wonder, as Hagar cried, I wonder if she cried out to God. It had to remind her of the situation before. All alone in the desert, sent. Even if she hadn't talked to him since then, that's when she called him, the God who sees me. I wonder if the remembering of that situation, how often do we do that, right? We don't talk to God. We want nothing to do with him. And then we get in this situation and we're all like, I remember to call on the name of the Lord. And I wonder if as she cried out, if she's like, man, this is that situation before. And maybe she remembered wait, God told me at that time that my descendants, he said, Hagar, your descendants will be too numerous to count. And she's like, he told me that. And here I am. What happened to that? What was all that 1 in a million talk? Right? And here she was again. But that time, at least, there was a spring. She was camped out by a spring. Last time there had been water. Even though she had nowhere to go, at least she had water. Sometimes it's like, man, I have nowhere to go, no options, but at least I can stay here. But then when there's no option of we have nowhere to go and we cannot stay here. And this time it's different because she has no water, and making it far worse is that she has a son. Makes it far worse. It'd be a lot easier for her to just crawl up and die by herself than now she has a son whom she cannot care for. And you have to believe that when she cried out to God at the same time. And let's see what happens. Ooh, the suspense is getting to me. Will he answer? Who knows? All right. So in verse 17, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? What's wrong? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. So God hears, because God always hears. The angel of God tells her, God has heard the boy crying. Last time, she called God the God who sees because she had an experience with God that revealed to her that God saw her. When no one else saw her, God saw her. What a pleasant sound to her ears to hear God say, I hear him too. I hear him too. Because sometimes it's nice to be like, yeah, God is watching over me. God is looking after me. God, I have a relationship with you and you've cared for me and you've watched over me. But what about him? What about him? Oh, I'm worried about him. I'm worried about where he is with what's happened just now. He's been rejected by his father. Where is he? I don't even know. And God says to her, he doesn't say, I hear you crying. He says, I heard the boy crying. Yeah. I hear him too. I heard him too. And I'm answering because of his tears, not yours. What a good revelation of God. Yeah, he hears him too. Because sometimes we have a revelation of God sees me, and then we need to have another revelation of God sees them. God sees them apart from me. He doesn't see them because they have a relationship with me. God doesn't see them through me. God isn't looking through my loving eyes at this person. God sees them on their own. God hears them on their own. Leaving Abraham must have been awful. Her son was going to be the heir, and then he's just dropped. He's sent away. He's passed over. He's looked past by his father. And guys, in today's day and age, so many children are looked past and looked over by their fathers. And this is the truth of it. Their heavenly Father says, I hear them. I see them. I see them too. I'm their heavenly Father. I love them. like a father. God saw him and God heard him. And notice God tells her to go lift the boy up. He doesn't say, hey, there's some water. Get the boy up and take him there. He says, go get the boy up. Go get the boy up. And then he opens her eyes so she sees the water. He tells her to lift the boy up before he tells her there's water. He asks for her obedience when the results are yet unseen. He says, go get him up. And she doesn't say, why? Do you know how hard it was to get him in those thorny bushes? She's saying, why get him up? Where are we to go? Because she's experienced this God before. She's experienced this God before. And God says, go get him up. And she's like, You know, that's what she makes Pee Wee Herman noises when she's happy. She's like, giggling the whole way over there. And he's like, Mom, you're so embarrassing. But he tells her, go get him up. Lift him up out of the grave that you put him in. Because it was all hope was lost. Go pick him up out of that grave that you put him in. And then I will show you where to go. You know she used the last of her strength to put him in there. But you know she wasn't complaining when God said, go get him out. You know that she found, and there's nothing to give you strength like hope when hope is lost, right? And hope is regained. And you know she's like cutting up her face, getting in the thorny bush. You know she doesn't even care anymore. She's just like, God has spoken. I found the energy. And then God shows her where their water is. Everything had changed. But listen, when he asked for her obedience, he says, go get the boy. And she gets him out. Nothing has changed. She was obedient. He didn't tell her what was going to change. He just said, go get him up. She goes and she gets him up and nothing has changed. And then after she's obedient, he says, now let me open your eyes. Now let me open your eyes. Once you've been obedient, I'm going to open your eyes so that you can see my faithfulness. And God took care of Ishmael and Hagar. God was faithful to his promise all those years ago. But for her to see God's faithfulness, for Hagar to see God's faithfulness, to see the goodness of God, she had to run out of options. She had to run out of water. She had to run out of all the provisions that man had given her. Everything she had, all of her inventory, she had to completely run out before she could see the provisions of God. She had to get to the end before she reached out for his hand. She had to get there. And sometimes when we're in the desert, when we're walking along this hopeless road, we're like sipping on this skin of old water, right? And we're just taking little sips, trying to conserve water, just trying to survive. Like, this is all I got. This is all I got to make it work, God. This is all I have, and it's got to last because we don't have anything and we're not getting anything else. And to survive, we got to sip on this. We got to care for this. This is important. We got to take small sips of warm water. You know that water is so hot, right? It's awful. I wouldn't even drink warm water. But then she had to run out of that warm water before God could take her to the cool water that she could drink down in gulps. She can drink it down in gulps. It's a well, right? All of a sudden, man, it's so crazy how this is all I got. Like, I just got this little bit of water and it's warm. It's not good, but this is all we got. Right? Only to run out and then see the goodness of God. And God's like, I have some cool water that is never ending right here for you. You just needed to run out of that warm water that you were drinking. You just had to run out of that warm water that you were drinking so that you could reach my water. They had to reach their end. And Abraham had to let them go. Abraham had to let them go. He had to put them on the road. It's not easy to put loved ones on the road. It's not. You see it all the time when parents are dropping their kids off at college, right? And that's not even the desert. It is a spiritual desert. But he had to put him on the road, and it was the road to God's greater plan. Sometimes we have to let go. So we don't want to see our loved ones in desperate, hopeless situations, but sometimes we need to let them be in hopeless situations so that they see God. One of my most favorite examples of God's goodness, and if you've known me for any length of time, you've heard this story, because I bring it up at dinner parties. I'm just like, you want to hear a story about the goodness of God? People are like, sure. And I used to tell this story a lot when we were traveling in the band and playing at churches or bars. It was way more awkward at bars. But I just was like, man, if I don't tell this story here, then I'm not being faithful. Because I would just weep. So embarrassing. Telling the story, but I think it just speaks of the goodness of God. And it's about C.S. Lewis. And I know I put a bunch of pictures back there. I'll tell you when I put them up. So C.S. Lewis, I read a book that Daisy got for me because she was my girlfriend at the time. When your girlfriend gives you a book, you have to read it because they're like, hey, did you read that? And you're like, I'm not really into Jane Austen. Can we read something else? No, but so this is about C.S. Lewis. And it tells a story of his life. And when he was a young boy, his mother was a Christian, and she raised him up, and she taught him about Jesus. But then she got very, very sick. And they moved in with some relatives. And in that time, you would just keep him at home. They just kept her in the house, in a room, locked away, and she didn't come out, and he couldn't see her. And he says, I remember looking through the keyhole, just trying to get a glimpse of my mom. Just trying to see her. Just a little bit. I couldn't talk to her. And I remember that she told me about this Jesus and what he could do, and so I prayed for her healing. And then she died. And I remember this Jesus raised people from the dead, and I prayed and prayed that God would raise her from the dead, and God didn't. And I told myself I would never ask for anything again from him. He said, I remember being in the war and hearing people in the trenches with me crying and praying to God and sending him their petitions. And I was like, I will. And he says, I would never sink so low again to ask for anything. And he didn't believe in God. He was like, this is utter foolishness. Well, eventually, J.R.R. Tolkien, actually, Lord of the Rings, full circle, convinced him that God was real, and he became a Christian, and he wrote a series of books called the Narnia Chronicles. And there's one called The Magician's Nephew. And if you're an artist of any kind, like, you know that when everything you write or draw or do, like, you're working something out, you're putting something in there that's a part of your story. And in The Magician's Nephew, it's very much like his story. There's two characters, Polly and Diggory, and you can throw the one up the kids. Polly and Diggory, and when Polly comes in and meets Diggory, he's sitting there and he's crying by a tree. And she's like, why are you crying? And he's like, you'd be crying too if your life was like mine, because my mother is sick. And we've been sent to live with our uncle and aunt, and my mother is locked behind a door, and I can't even see her. You see the correlation, right? And so this Diggory, he represents C.S. Lewis. He represents C.S. Lewis. So they end up going to Narnia, because that's what happens in Narnia Chronicles. They go to Narnia, this magical land. And in this land, there is a lion named Aslan, and Aslan represents Jesus. And Aslan tells them, go to this garden, and I want you to pick this apple. And I have a picture of what the garden actually looked like. Perfect. And there was a peacock there, because it was like, Merritt Allen. And there's an apple there. And I want you to pick that apple. And the picture I have, it's a silver apple, but I didn't have one. Just have a regular apple. And he's like, I want you to get that. I want you to bring it back to me because it will heal Narnia. That fruit will heal Narnia. But while he's in the garden, a witch comes, the white witch, if you remember her. And she says, why give that to the lion? There's life in that apple. There's magical power. If you take it and you give it to your mother, it will heal your mother. It will heal her. Don't give it to the lion. What do you care about this world? You don't even know the lion. Why do you trust him? Take the apple to your mother. Well, he gets back and he gives the apple to Aslan. He gives it to him. He hands it to him. And Polly says, why did you do that? Didn't you hear what she said? Didn't you hear what she said? If you give the apple to your mom, you could heal your mom. When I first came upon you, everything you talked about was your mom. It was the situation. Your whole life, your whole world was in shambles because of this one situation. And you had the key. You had the key to fix it all. And you gave it to Aslan. You gave it. Why would you do that? And he says, Because I began to tell the lion about my mother. And as I looked into his eyes, I could tell that he already knew. He already knew. And by the look in his eyes, I could tell that he cared more than I did. Not only did he know, he cared far more than I did. And I thought, I can trust someone like that with this. I can trust him with this. How many of us have been holding on to something? Man, because we think it's the key. And we've been holding on to somebody because we think we're the key. That we're the one who sees them. We're the only one who hears them. And sometimes we got to be like Abraham, and we have to. Man, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. It's everything. It was everything in this boy's world. I mean, it mattered. It mattered. It was everything he cared about. Either giving it up or using it for the mother. And he gave it up because he said, he knows and he cares more than I do. And I can trust someone like that. I can trust him. And I'm here to tell you, you can trust him. You can trust someone like that with anything because he cares, and he cares more than you do. And he has all the answers, and he's faithful, and he will provide, and all you have to do is let it go. Just let it go. Can you do that? It's hard. It's hard. It took incredible wisdom on this young boy's part. But it wasn't in the wisdom that he was making the right decision. It was his trust in the lion. He said, I can trust him. I can trust him so much that I can trust him with this. And for everyone, this is different. But the answer is the same. You can trust him with it. You just got to let it go and put it in his hands. Completely in his hands. Don't split it with him. Don't let him touch your apple. Give it to him and let it go.